The chandelier above the table cost more than most people made in a lifetime. 12 candles burned at the center of the mahogany table. 11 women sat in perfect silence, backs straight, hands folded, hearts hammering behind carefully painted smiles. The room smelled of money, jasmine, and fear. Nobody spoke. Nobody dared, because she hadn't spoken yet. At the far head of the table, draped in white like a queen holding court over the condemned, sat Claudette Romano, matriarch of the most powerful crime family on the eastern seaboard. 71 years old, eyes like obsidian, a smile that had sent better women running for the door. She had hand-selected every woman at this table. Each one was perfect, educated, beautiful. From the right bloodline, the right family, the right tax bracket. Each one had been groomed in the most elegant sense of the word for one singular purpose: to become the wife of Dominic Romano, the most feared man alive. And not one of them knew that the woman he would choose wasn't in this room. The invitations had arrived on a Tuesday. Cream-colored envelopes sealed in black wax, pressed with the Romano family crest, a serpent coiled around a crown. No return address. No explanation beyond 3 lines printed in precise, unforgiving script. You have been selected. Dinner Saturday, 8 p.m. Do not be late, do not decline. 11 women opened those envelopes across 5 different states. 11 women understood without being told what selected meant. Claudette Romano did not invite people. She summoned them. At the Romano estate, the dining room had been prepared with surgical precision. The long mahogany table stretched nearly 15 feet, polished to a mirror shine, reflecting the chandelier above like a second sky. Place settings of bone china, crystal stemware, candelabras lit with real beeswax taper candles, their flames barely trembling as if even the fire had been trained to behave. The women filed in at 7:58 p.m. They took their seats without being told which chairs were theirs, because their names had been placed on small porcelain cards, positioned with the kind of deliberate intent that communicated, "I already know everything about you. I already know where you belong." On the left side of the table sat 5 women dressed in variations of black and ivory, tailored, understated, money whispered rather than money screamed. Among them, Sophia Marchetti, 26, daughter of a Milanese shipping magnate, dark hair swept into an elegant chignon, her hands folded over the table's edge with practiced grace. Beside her, Katharina Voss, blonde and sharp-boned, whose family owned 3 private banks in Zurich. Then Priya Anand, whose father sat on the boards of 4 pharmaceutical companies, her silk blouse the color of champagne. On the right, Camille Beaumont, a French-American heiress whose charity galas made the cover of glossy magazines. Alessia De Luca, whose family had intermarried with Italian nobility for 3 generations. And others equally polished, equally terrified, equally performing calm. At the near end of the table, slightly apart from the others, sat the 11th woman, Mara. No last name on the porcelain card, just Mara. She wore green, deep forest green, the color of something that refused to apologize for existing. No jewelry except small gold hoops, hair loose, posture not quite as rigid as the others. She arrived 3 minutes early, sat down before anyone else, and spent those 3 minutes studying the room the way a person studies a place they fully intend to escape from. Nobody spoke to her. Nobody looked at her directly. She was the anomaly, the smudge on an otherwise perfect page. Even the other women who barely knew each other seemed to understand instinctively that she did not belong here, that some error had been made. That Claudette Romano, a woman whose judgment was considered infallible, had perhaps for once made a mistake. They pitied her the way beautiful, powerful people pity those they consider beneath them, not cruelly but distantly. The way you might feel sorry for a dandelion growing up through a marble floor, pretty, stubborn, completely wrong for this place. Mara caught Sophia looking at her and held her gaze 1 beat too long. Sophia looked away first. Claudette entered at exactly 8:00 p.m. The room did not fall quiet, it had already been quiet. But something changed in the air, the way air changes before a storm rolls in off open water. The women straightened. Smiles appeared. She was smaller than most of them had imagined. 5'3", perhaps, silver hair coiled at the nape of her neck. A cream-colored suit that probably cost more than a year's rent for most people in the city. Her face was the face of a woman who had outlived every enemy, every ally, and every version of herself that had ever been weak. She did not sit at the head of the table. She stood at it. "I won't waste your time with pleasantries," she said. Her voice was low, unhurried, the kind of voice that has never had to raise itself to be heard. "You know why you're here. Each of you represents an alliance, a name, a legacy. I've spent 18 months compiling this list." She paused, letting that number settle over the room like a verdict. 18 months. And every woman at this table was chosen because she is, by any objective measure, exceptional. She walked the length of the table slowly, glancing at each face as she passed. "My son will meet you all this evening. He will be the final decision maker. A ghost of a smile. He always is. But I want you to understand something first." She stopped walking. She was standing almost precisely behind Mara. "This family does not make mistakes," Claudette said quietly. "Everything that happens tonight happens by design." No one noticed the way her hand briefly rested on the back of Mara's chair. No one except Mara. Dominic Romano arrived at 9:15 p.m. Not late on his own schedule, which was the same thing except that when Dominic was late, no one said so. He was 34 years old and looked like a man who had been forged rather than born. Something about the jaw, the economy of movement, the way he entered a room without announcing himself, yet somehow became the only thing in it worth looking at. Dark suit, no tie, a scar through his left eyebrow, thin and silver, eyes the color of deep water, the kind you couldn't see the bottom of. He stood at the entrance to the dining room for a moment. He looked at the table. Something shifted behind his eyes, not surprise. Something more like resignation. Like a man who had walked into this particular trap before and had never once found a way out that didn't cost him something. "Mother," he said. Just the one word. "Sit down, Dominic." Claudette gestured to the empty chair at the opposite head of the table. "Dinner is served." He sat, the first course came out. Conversation began to flow with the careful calibration of people who were being watched and knew it. Sophia spoke first, because she always spoke first. She was good at it, poised, witty, drawing Dominic into a conversation about a gallery opening in Rome she'd attended the previous spring. She was charming. She was brilliant. She laughed at exactly the right moments and asked questions that were intelligent without being threatening. Dominic answered her politely. He answered all of them politely. He asked Katerina about her work. He listened to Priya describe her foundation with what appeared to be genuine interest. He asked a follow-up question that demonstrated he'd actually absorbed what she said. He was, by any measure, a perfect dinner companion, and he was absolutely, unmistakably, somewhere else entirely. His eyes moved almost involuntarily, almost without his seeming to know it, down the length of the table. Past the candles and the crystal and the women his mother had arranged like the most expensive chess pieces in the world. To Mara, who was not performing. That was what stopped him the first time. Every other woman at the table was performing, some version of themselves calibrated for this exact moment, this exact audience, this exact audition. It wasn't false exactly. It was just filtered, processed through years of understanding what rooms like this one required. Mara wasn't filtered. She was eating. Actually eating, not picking at her food with aristocratic restraint, not leaving things artfully half-finished to imply a naturally small appetite. She was eating with the focused, unself-conscious appreciation of someone who didn't get to eat food like this very often and was not going to pretend otherwise. She caught him looking. She didn't smile, didn't look away, didn't blush or adjust her posture or perform any of the dozen small social corrections that the moment seemed to call for. She raised an eyebrow just slightly. The kind of look that said, "Can I help you?" He looked away. He did not look back for the rest of the first course, but he thought about her through all of it. By the third course, Claudette had begun steering conversation more deliberately, creating moments for each woman to shine, orchestrating the table like a conductor who already knew how the symphony ended. It was expertly done, the work of a woman who had been managing powerful rooms for 5 decades. Dominic participated. He asked questions. He complimented appropriately. He rejected all of them. Not allowed, not yet. But the women could feel it. The way you feel when a door hasn't closed but you know it isn't going to open. One by one, something in their composure shifted imperceptibly, a slight softening, a quiet recalibration. The hope didn't leave their eyes exactly, but it settled into something more realistic, the way hope tends to when it meets a man who has already decided. He was, in the kindest possible terms, unreachable. At 10:30, dessert was cleared. The table sat in weighted silence. Claudette looked at her son. "Well," she said. The single word carried the entire weight of 18 months. Dominic set down his coffee cup. He looked at the women, at Sophia, Katerina, Priya, Camille, Alessia, all of them. And his expression held something that was not contempt but close to its gentler cousin. The quiet sorrow of a man looking at things he cannot want, through no fault of the things themselves. "Mother," he said, "they're all extraordinary women." "Yes," Claudette said, "they are. And I'm not going to choose any of them." The silence that followed had texture. You could feel it against your skin. Sophia's expression didn't change. Katerina looked at her water glass. Camille pressed her lips together, very briefly, then smoothed them into something neutral. Mara reached for her wine. Dominic's eyes moved to her. "Give me the one no one wanted," he said. The table went very, very still. "Give me her." The other women looked at Mara the way people look at a magic trick, searching for the deception, because surely there had to be one. Mara looked at Dominic Romano. Her expression was not triumphant, not flattered, not the expression of a woman who had just won something. It was the expression of a woman who had just been handed a problem she hadn't asked for and was already calculating how to handle it. "I'm not a consolation prize," she said. Dominic almost smiled. "I didn't say you were. You said the one no one wanted. That's what you said." "I said the one asterisk I wanted," he said quietly. "And let's be honest, no one at this table wanted you here. It wasn't cruel. It was simply devastatingly accurate. They were selected," he continued, his voice low enough that only she could fully hear it now. "You were asterisk placed. That's different. My mother doesn't make mistakes." He glanced at Claudette. "Which means you're not a mistake. You're the answer to a question nobody asked out loud." He stood up. "Walk with me," he said. She didn't move immediately. She took one more slow sip of wine, set the glass down with careful precision, and pushed back her chair. And she walked with him. Claudette Romano watched them go, her hands folded in her lap, her expression revealing precisely nothing. Except if you had been watching her eyes, and nobody at that table was quite composed enough to watch her eyes, there was something there. Something that was not quite pride, because pride was too small for it. Something that looked more like the exhale of a woman who has been holding her breath for 8 months, and has finally, been given permission to breathe. In the east corridor of the Romano estate, beneath portraits of dead men who had built and lost empires, Dominic and Mara stood facing each other in the specific way of two people who are aware that whatever they say next will matter. "How long have you worked for my mother?" he asked. 3 years. "In what capacity?" "Officially, her personal executive assistant." A beat. "Actually, the person who knows where everything is buried, who owes what to whom, and what the password is for every account she pretends she doesn't have." He studied her for a long moment. "She put you in that room," he said, "not as a candidate." "No, as a test." Mara tilted her head very slightly. "You tell me." The pause stretched between them. "She wanted to see if I'd pick the safe choice," he said. The obvious choice, the one that looks right on paper. Did you? I'm talking to you, aren't I? You're talking to the woman your mother's been training for 3 years, Mara said, and her voice was steady but her eyes held something behind steadiness, something that was a question and a warning at the same time. You should ask yourself whether that makes me the test or the answer. Both, he said finally. I think you're both. She held his gaze. Then you should also know, she said quietly, that I was going to quit. 3 weeks ago, I handed your mother my resignation. Something shifted in his expression, not surprise, something rower than that. What stopped you? She told me to come to dinner first. The corridor was very quiet. Somewhere deep in the house, the other women were being thanked, handed their coats, guided to waiting cars with the smooth efficiency of a household that managed everything with seamless discretion. 11 women were leaving. 1 was staying. The story Mara had never told anyone, not fully, not to the end, was this. She had come to work for Claudette Romano at 26 years old, carrying a degree she'd funded herself. A debt that was twice what the degree was worth, and the particular resilience of someone who has grown up understanding that no room in the world was built for her. She would simply have to find a way in anyway. She was not from a family with a name. She was from a family with a mother who worked double shifts at a hospital laundry facility, and a father who had been gone long enough that his absence had become background noise. Something you stopped noticing, the way you stop noticing traffic when you've lived in a city long enough. She had gotten the job through a placement agency. A temp position initially, 3 months. At the end of month 1, Claudette had called her into her office. You reorganized my filing system without being asked, she said. It wasn't organized, Mara had replied. No, Claudette agreed. It was. I wanted to see how long it would take you to fix it. That was when Mara should have understood what kind of woman she was working for. She stayed because the pay was exceptional and the work was interesting in ways she hadn't anticipated. And because, though she never would have said this aloud, something in Claudette Romano recognized something in Mara. And the sensation of being recognized by someone like that is not a small thing. It is, for some people, the first time it has ever happened. 3 years later, Mara knew everything. She knew the names on accounts that didn't publicly exist. She knew which judges had been encouraged to rule in Romano favor, and how that encouragement had been structured. She knew the combination to the study safe, the location of the property in Umbria that appeared on no deed under Romano's name, and the encrypted phone number for a man in Geneva whose job title was simply Solutions. She also knew, because she paid attention to everything, that Dominic Romano had not been home in 8 months, that he came twice a year reliably, and both times left after exactly 3 days. That Claudette spoke of him in the third person even when addressing correspondence to him. That the portrait of him in the West Wing study had been turned slightly toward the wall, not enough for a visitor to notice, but enough that it didn't look you in the eye when you walked past. Something had broken between them. She didn't know exactly what. She knew it was the thing Claudette never spoke about. And she knew, because she knew Claudette Romano better than almost anyone alive, that this dinner, these 11 women, this entire elaborate, expensive production, was not really about finding Dominic a wife. It was about getting him home. It was about giving him a reason to stay. At midnight, Dominic led Mara to the real study. Not the formal one guests were shown, but the one behind the bookcase that swung open on a pressure hinge. The one with the mahogany desk scored with old burns from cigarettes, and the lamp that cast amber light over stacks of ledgers and photographs, and the accumulated evidence of a life lived in constant consequence. He poured 2 glasses of whiskey without asking if she wanted one. She took it. They stood at the window overlooking the estate's south lawn. Old trees, grounds lights casting long shadows across grass that had been tended by people who had worked here their whole lives. Why were you leaving? He asked. Mara looked at the glass in her hand for a moment before she answered. Because I was becoming someone I didn't plan to become, she said. 3 years in this world does something to you. You start to understand it from the inside. And once you understand something from the inside, you can't unknow it. You carry it everywhere. And eventually you have to decide, is this who I am now? Is this the life I'm choosing? Or did I just forget to keep choosing? He was quiet. You could have leveraged what you know, he said. You'd have been set for life. I know, but you didn't. No. Why? She turned to look at him fully then, and what was in her eyes was not performance and not strategy, and not the carefully managed impression of a woman who understood what this moment required. It was just her, plain and tired and completely serious. Because I don't want to be *set, she said. I want to build something. I want to look back one day and know that what I have is mine, that I made it, that I chose it, that it means something because it cost me something. I don't want to be comfortable. I want to be alive. The words landed in the room and stayed there. Dominic Romano had run criminal enterprises across 4 countries. He had sat across tables from men who wanted him dead and made them, against every instinct they had, work for him instead. He had negotiated in rooms where the wrong word meant blood, and he had always found the right word. He had not, in recent memory, felt the specific and destabilizing sensation of being completely undone by someone simply telling the truth. My mother told you to stay, he said. His voice was quieter now. She said to come to dinner first. She knew I'd pick you. Mara considered that, did she? She knows me better than I know myself. It's the most infuriating thing about her. He turned back to the window, jaw tight. She knows I can't stand rooms full of people performing for me. She knows the moment someone stops performing is the moment I actually start paying attention. A pause. She built the whole evening around one woman who wouldn't perform. That's a lot of trouble to go to, Mara said. She'd go to a lot more than that. His voice dropped. Something cracked open in it, very slightly, the sound of a man who has been holding something for 8 months and is reaching the limit of what holding costs. She's been trying to get me back here, back home. And he stopped. I've been staying away because it's easier than having the conversation we need to have. About what you did, Mara said quietly. He looked at her sharply. I know most of it, she said. It's my job to know. And what do you think? She was silent for a moment. Not performing the silence, actually sitting inside the question, giving it the weight it deserved. I think, she said carefully, that you made a decision you believed was right, and it wasn't, and you've been punishing yourself for it in the loneliest possible way, by staying away from the only person whose opinion actually matters to you. She paused, and I think your mother put me in that room tonight not just to bring you home, but to show you that she still trusts her own judgment, that she still believes in building things. She looked at him, even after everything. The room held that. Outside, the old trees stood patient and enormous in the ground's lights, trees that had been growing since before anyone in this house was born, that would go on long after all of them were gone. Dominic Romano stood completely still. And then something happened that perhaps only Mara would ever see because she was the only one in the room. His shoulders dropped. 1/2 inch, maybe less. The kind of release that happens when a person has been braced for so long they've forgotten they were bracing. He didn't say anything for a long moment. When he did, his voice was rough at the edges. I came home tonight because my mother asked me to, he said. I was going to leave after dinner. I'd already decided. Mara waited. I'm not leaving, he said. It wasn't a declaration. It wasn't romantic. It was simply a man telling the truth about what he had decided. And Mara understood, because she understood people, because it was perhaps the most essential thing about her, that this was more significant than anything he could have said with more words. She nodded once. Good, she said. 3 months later, the porcelain name card from Mara's place at the dining table was found in Claudette Romano's desk drawer. It was the only one she'd kept. On the back in her precise handwriting were 2 words, she'll do, which from Claudette Romano was the closest thing to she's exactly right that the world was ever going to get. The chandelier still burned.